My name is Wendy Robinson Fernsell, and on August 2nd, 1985, I was a flight attendant on Delta Flight 191 that crashed on landing in Dallas-Fort Worth. After the accident, there was a huge outpouring of care, concern, love from people all over. And I received a letter from another flight attendant named Kelly Duncan. It's kind of you belong to a club that you don't want to belong to. But Kelly had survived the Air Florida crash. And so she wrote me a letter and said, I can't possibly know what you're going through. And she'd been through a lot worse, I think, you know. But what's helped me is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I thought, well, that's great, you know, good for her. I went to church and I was involved in some groups locally, some 12-step programs. And so I was on what I considered a spiritual path, and I knew about God, but I always felt like I'd go through the priest to get to him. I used an intermediary. In February, after the crash in '86, I had what I would call a breakdown, and I think it all just came crashing in. And I did a complete reevaluation, I guess, of who I was and where I was going in my life, and I really just had to build from the ground up. My friend Sherry and I were co-chairing Ioneer Alert for the Junior League. So she said, you know, you can have a personal relationship with Christ, you just have to ask him into your heart. So she and I prayed, and I did, and in November of '88, on a Curcio weekend, that's what I did, and that has made all the difference. It wasn't an immediate thing. At that time, it was a mountaintop experience. But what I have found, and probably a lot of other people have found, is I've developed a relationship over a long period of time, which is how relationships are, of getting to know somebody. But that's what's given me my strength to put it in perspective, I guess, to say God does have a purpose and a plan. And I tell my kids that all the time, for whatever's happening, whether it's good or bad. But that an airplane crash was the best thing that ever happened to me, to put me on the right path for my life to become a better person. Afterwards, there was a lot of guilt of why me? Nothing special, haven't done anything, I wasn't heroic that day. Probably a lot of people maybe deserved more. That's not what grace is all about. It's unmerited favor, and I didn't do anything to earn to be here. But God had a bigger plan, and I'm just every day trying to be part of whatever He wants for me to do.